So I will start. For those who have been working in cybersecurity for a while, you know that there is nothing really new under the sun with regard to cyber attacks. I suggest here to play a game and guess which threats or which attacks correspond to each of the icons here on the screen. When do you think the first DDoS took place? Not the very first one that was that's been recorded, no? So I hear 86, 90. I hear 90. Okay, so the second icon, it's the manipulation of social engineering for IT purposes. So a bonus track, do you know who it was? So we'll talk about this. So it's a legend. Okay, so then the first attack, the first cyber attack on the web. So some people, so the fourth icon is man in the middle. It refers to listening or intercepting conversations between two machines that talk to each other. So the fifth icon, it's a legendary paper. It's called Smash in the Stack for Fun and Profit by Alec Wan. And he was the very first one who theorized the buffer workflows. I'll let you guess the date in your mind. And then the first phishing campaign, which is then the ransomware. That's the last icon. So is there an icon here that shouldn't be there? Yeah, the ransomware, it is. Because the ransomware has never been an attack, a method for attack. It's a method for monetizing. You do ransomware once you've found credentials, etc. But in itself, it's not an attack. So 74 for the first DDoS, 1990, Kevin Mitnick takes over the whole of the West Coast. 1990, these are the first attacks on the web. 1994 for the fourth icon. Aleph 1, Smash Stack, 1996. And 96, 97, and 2005 for the last icon. So we will start now. Good afternoon to all. I am Philippe Hulot, the co-founder of CROWDSEC, a software I have nothing to sell to you. And your we will be talking about what we do and the results we've obtained after a year. So now we are working with over 50,000 machines. We've seen a lot of things that seemed funny to us. We will start with the fact that cybersecurity has never had any issues with the means, resources. Let's just say cybersecurity is not a problem of means. JP Morgan has a budget of $800 million. It's an annual budget of 800 million. It's the GDP of Afghanistan, and they were attacked. And so the amount of money you put on the table won't necessarily protect you, but so that's why we think that we need a new approach. And I will slowly explain why we have such a broad network. Let's just call the JP Morgan approach is a superhero approach. Let's say I'm a superhero and doesn't matter how much of a superhero you are. When you're fighting alone against an entire army, it's completely useless. So imagine a surgeon saying we are facing terrorists and we will go out one by one. This is a stupid approach, isn't it? So in the industry for the past 30 years, what we've been doing is really going one by one to face our attackers. It's not very useful. And so what we did then as a response was to rename all the antiviruses as EDR, and we had the discipline strategies that they all failed. And one of the things we haven't tried is that we are many more who want to use the internet in a legitimate way. And so our strength is really our number, because we're many more than the criminals who are misusing the internet. And this is the plan we've set up at CROWDSEC. And we've decided to edit on an open source software. And so this software, what it does, it will block your attacks, and it will share the IP addresses that led the attacks with all the users, something similar to Waze. So this network benefit the users and ourselves. So whoever is not part of the network, we sell the signals back to them. So when it works, we acquire log, any type of log, whether it's distributed in a log pit, such as ELK or syslog. These are local logs, CloudTrails, CM, etc. All the logs belong to us, and then we apply behavioral search. So if someone failed to write their password for 20 times, then maybe it means they don't have the password. So if anyone does transactions at $0.1 while the average basket is much higher, then maybe they're trying to scam some credit cards. Once we found the behavior, we block it with an EPS, and we will share the IP that had the wrong behavior with, we will share it and then bring it back to the community. So let's say if I want to enter a nightclub with a bad behavior, the bouncer will, of course, detect the bad behavior. And then the more, if I repeat this bad behavior, then the bouncer will never let me in. So the attacks, we block the attacks. There are 50 scenarios. I'm not gonna go into the details. So I will give the example of bolt scalping. So it's when you buy JTX on Walmart because they just arrived, and you just sell it right after, and you make a benefit $100 on it. So maybe you are misusing the terms and conditions of the websites, and this is not really a legal issue. It's not a cyber attack, but Walmart and Sony are not happy. Their customers are not happy with this behavior. So it's negative behavior, even if it's not similar to a cyber attack. Once we see the behavior across the network, we will share that with the entire network. So what happens once we've used our strength, which is our number, then we will really degrade the IP pool of our attackers. So you can create as many domain names as you wish, but IP addresses, you have a limited number, 3.2 billion. So we know who we are giving these IP addresses. So most of exploits prefer using IPv4. So when we degrade the IP pool of the users, we'll really limit their capacity to for bad behavior. So one last slide before showing you the results of what this network, before sharing the results of this network of the past year. These EPS are all linked to a database called Smoke. So we have tens of thousands of machines who reshare the signals, and we cannot redistribute smoke directly. On SOCs, yes, we can. On SecOps, yes, but not to automate, to protect ourselves. Because if someone says the IP A, B, C, D, whatever is dangerous and it hasn't been verified, checked, then we are now using a system called the consensus. Let's imagine that you have on one hand of the room software that's been installed for the past 6 months. Let's say I won't trust you, but on the other side of the room, let's say I have a software that's been established for more than 6 months. I trust you. The signals are precise and efficient. But if the other part of the room has detected signals and then you two have seen it, the other side has seen it, then we will share it. So we also have a control network, a whitelist. You cannot block Microsoft update, quad 1, quad 2, etc. At the end, in real time, as long as long as any IP, we will enter the IP in a second database called FIRE. We have a conversion rate of about 1% because you will never be sending a false positive. We redistribute the IPs for their WAFs, their Cisco, their big IP, etc. This is what it looks like. The CROWDSEC network strength. We started with France. We have more installations in France than anywhere else. The fourth country where we are based is Germany. And I think very quickly the US will become number one. So the users have sent us the average IP reported per user is 214. So this is just to give you an idea. These are machines that do not have DNS and that take 2,000 scans per day. So the users report about 2,400 threats per user. So it's quite significant. We don't have a large footprint in Africa yet. In the top 10, so the US are top 1 because they are the ones who have the highest number of IP in the world. So then we need to be nuanced. Our former Russian friends, they have a strong tendency for many years to use exit points that are not based in Russia. So we don't see them as being Russian on the radar. They use German, Chinese, Pakistanis IP addresses. So we see here the IP threats per region, but what's interesting is what does this 1% represent? So 1% of IP addresses are responsible for 92% of the threats reported by a machine. As in, it means that 92% of the threats are carried out by a very small number of machines in the world. And so when knowing how the software works. Even if you're blocked at reputation, you do not go at the behavior level. 90% of the 90% of the threats are blocked at the reputation level. So in smoke, what's interesting is that all the IP ranges do not act at the same speed. Smoke is uncurated, and then we have a ratio of aggressive IPs in smoke for the past months, the past 3 months, forever, and let's say for the past week. And we've seen that 12.6% of the IPs this week. So we cannot extrapolate that to the entire database, but 12.6% of IPs are new every week. We can also say that globally 12.6% of IPs exit this database, which means that parrots are having IPs that are rotating. And we know on the other end of the spectrum, we have 25 IP addresses that never change, which means we know that if you've never been visited by this Chinese thread that's called AX31, then it means you've never existed on the internet. So many of these IPs are rotating, but many more are actually not rotating at all. So we have a 12.6% renewal rate every 12 hours. So it's good to keep that in mind. So I'm sorry for anyone who is from OVH in the room. What this graph is telling us is that if you use AWS IP that is compromised, after how long does it take for it to no longer be compromised? I don't have any shares at AWS, but we see here that after about 3 days, the threat is neutralized at AWS. And you know why? Because if you have that threat on the machine, if you don't clean it, then AWS will do it for you. So all the IPs on AWS will disappear after 3 days. Then we have Azure, and we have OVH at 17 days. And I won't bash on them for no reason. The difference is that on OVH you can have you have more recent, up-to-date infrastructures, and so we cannot really compare the two. However, this graph is still telling us something. We are still waiting for the day when, the blessed day when DigitalOcean will be cleaned up. A compromised IP on DigitalOcean will still be compromised in 2014. Another graph, I'm sorry, it's quite technical and my slides are not very sexy, but you can take any pictures you want, the figures are public. If I take the IP that are less than a week, less than a month, less than 3 months, AWS is really a leader, far ahead. At the top of the IPs we've seen in a week, it's often AWS, because it's very, very easy to declare a spot instance and use it as a rebouncing instance and close it after 3 days. DigitalOcean, they have many IP. Azure, they have less IPs that rotate quite quickly, that get cleaned very quickly. And then all the other providers. So if you, at the end we have 106,000 that are not main providers. That means that 1 out of 6 aggressive machines comes from a non-cloud, but 5 out of 6 come from a private infrastructure such as a data center or Freebox or anything else, but not necessarily from a centralized cloud. This is on smoke. So these are the threats that we receive at any time in point. So the majority is very clearly AWS and DigitalOcean. All the others are much less present. And one thing really surprised me in this slide, Alibaba is I think it's the second cloud provider in the world. I think they are larger than Azure and GCP, but they are not the most the ones who stand out here. I don't know if because they are cleaning their machines, but we're very surprised to see a provider with that scale, with that size, and with very fewer IP addresses. In December, we've seen the log4j. So for those who were on Mars, log4j was a small vulnerability that scored 10 out of 10. And a few banks really got scared because banks, industries, they like Java. And so we all had a difficult moment in that period. So once the vulnerability is dealt with, there is a huge peak. What's interesting for us is the delay before the massive operational peak. And this peak was around 18, and it took about 4 days to ramp up at the max of the crisis. Then it went back down progressively after the 1st of January. And we can see that the pirates didn't take any holidays, and very professional of them, right? They were working from 25 December till 1st of January. And then suddenly around the 20th of January, there was a background activity that remained almost constant until mid-May before crashing down again, similarly to what had happened in January. So we think that people arrived afterwards that tried to conduct operations on servers that had not been patched yet, or that they were looking for another way to operate log4j. We don't have the answer, and actually I'm curious to know what your thoughts are, but we thought important to share this graph. So sometimes we have machines that are used by real companies, and the mapping of what we receive as threats is much more qualified in one instance than in the other. Our clients work vertically. So let's just say we have Adobe. Adobe Magento works in retail. And we have therefore others that work in energy. And so what I suggest, and I won't be doing it now, is to categorize vertically. That means which IP group is aggressive through which vertical. So when we remove the background noise, imagine we only have IPs that attack the media. Maybe they attack the media in France, in the UK during election time. So it means that these IPs are not a threat to the media, but are a threat to democracy. And by having this verticalization of the signal, it gives us a different perspective in the analysis of these attacks. Because we know there's an IP, we know where it's coming from geographically. And I'll give the example of EDF, who has servers in Singapore, for instance. Geographically, we can fence IPs that are not necessarily in a single country, but that are linked to a single actor. Similarly, an actor that works horizontally with a ransomware that will attack media, retail, energy, these are horizontal attacks. So they really don't care what they do, what you do in life, as long as they can make money. This is what matters most. I was quick, maybe too quick, but this will leave us time to ask questions if you wish. Yes, either if you can speak loud or we will find a mic for you. Between fire and smoke, all the network gives a signal at any time towards smoke. Smoke is where we have all the non-qualified threats. So let's say even if I identify something that's
De cette façon-là, en fait, smoke, ça va être par exemple.
That's wrong, it will arrive at smoke, but smoke is not used in that way. So let's say I identify an IP and I will ask CROWDSEC if they know it. Then my signal, and let's say my signal has been confirmed by CROWDSEC in live. And so then I know I'm dealing with a true alert. Fire on the other end is a base to which we've committed, and no mistake is possible on fire. You can do any remediation, but please do a remediation. I will choose a nipot here. Careful crappy, what does it do? VoEP. So we were very surprised because we're not dealing with VoEP until a customer told us. And once we started doing that, we had a really, really high number of alerts, and I discovered a whole different world.
Depuis, alors elle est même très, très, très agressive. Là, on a un bon.
So it's very, very, very aggressive. We have a great winner here. So it's very active. It's a nice actor. We have no doubt possible. And it comes from an IP blog that gave us a really bad IP address. Do you have any other questions? So very, very good question. We didn't hear the question from the audience, but very, very good question. We are in a race for means. So Microsoft, let's say it's not because they have 1 million IP that they will have a /10 of votes. Microsoft is considered as an entity with regard to its AS. So it's a vote by IP. So they cannot just arrive with many, many IPs and just crash the consensus. So we have many, what will happen is that we have many machines who will be working with various AS, but as a result, it needs an entire process to roll out, etc. But you were deployed at the same time, we have the same scenario, and we can say that this is really under the control of the same entity. Even if you might just run into a whitelist. So let's say even if you are very motivated, you may lose the reputation that you would have won over many machines. So the race, or what we brought to the table, is a race for means. I'm just saying that it will cost a lot of money and it may weaken us before starting. So we can have in an open network people who are in good faith, who act in good faith, people who make mistakes, people who have bad intentions. And see. So the whitelist, it's being crowdsourced, that so you can send something, and if everyone agrees and says, yeah, it's a Microsoft updates, for example, we will use the IPs and add them to the whitelist, whether it's open source or it's open source. And you can also use it for your firewall. I will take a typical example. We have Ledger. It's that company that creates code wallets for cryptocurrencies that are specialized on blockchains. And so they have IPs that attack the blockchain. And I say, well, if you want, I can give you these IPs because I'm not specialized in IP distribution as you are. So we will have more and more of these, and you can mix the IP sources that work for you. And Sequoia and others will give us this IP. And then you can mix any IP sources in your IPS directly. You have another question before we end the session? If you don't have any other questions, the good news is that we will have beer on our stand 6C5 starting from 4 or 5 p.m. We will be very happy to discuss about that. If you have money, please don't use it because it's free. And so thank you very much for your participation.